Yeah, absolutely. Well, slightly different being here with you, Matt, compared to being outside at Salford Quays to talk about this. But yeah, look, summer signings so far. We knew midfield was a priority this summer, and they've acted pretty quickly in terms of getting Andre Santos and Yuri Tillmans in for around 84, 85 million pounds altogether. Now, Cole Darlow, he's coming in on a free from Newcastle United because we're expecting Altay Bayındır, Radek Vitek to both leave the club this summer. Andre Onana went back out on loan to Turkey as well. So Cole Darlow will essentially be the number 2 going into the season. We have Tiernan Thompson here as well from Tottenham Hotspur. Very highly rated young winger who will get first team exposure this season. Sebastian, I know you know him quite well, but he'll get first team exposure with, if he impresses, he might get some opportunities on that left-hand side this season as well. But then the question is this enough? I mean, the midfield has been dealt with. There are suggestions as to whether they will go for another midfielder. I think they would like to, but it will be very much dependent on how the market develops. I don't think we'll see another 60, 70 million pound signing in the midfield. I think it'll be a lot lower than that. But I also think Manchester United will also look at left back. We reported last week that they have explored the conditions of a deal for Lewis Hall at Newcastle. He is someone we reported in March that they were very high on. And the reason being that Luke Shaw only has 12 months left on his contract. Patrick Dorgu is an interesting one because he's between being a left back and a left winger. And they only have Diogo Dalot, Nusar Mazraoui, who can play left back, but it's not their preferred position. They need a long-term solution at left back, and that could be Lewis Hall, but I think that's something that we might see develop over the next few weeks.
OK, well, let's talk specifically about what they've got so far, right? Yep. And I'm thinking about the midfielders here, because before the season, talk about Elliot Anderson, a big money signing coming in as a midfielder. There were, Adam Wharton, that kind of a signing. Baleba, big money midfield signings. In the end, they've gone with Santos and Yuri Tielemans. Do you think they've had a good window so far, Man United, or is it a bit, we haven't quite got the big signing that we wanted?
I don't think they were looking for the big signing per se. I think they were looking to fill some gaps, to bring some legs first and foremost, because that's what was lacking, I think, throughout the last couple of seasons. Andre Santos is a left-footed, so the same kind of profile of Baleba in terms of strong foot. Yuri Tielemans, for me, brings experience and the football IQ. So that's a big part, the football IQ, because the way he analyzes the game, I think it's a good combination between Santos, Yuri Tielemans, Tiernan Thompson. Is a youngsters. I think for me, he's some sort of a gamble. You don't have no pressure to put him in. He's not coming to change the team, to impact the team straight away. If he does, happy days. So far, I think they've been very careful in the way they were spending money, because according to the market right now, it's not extra money spent. Yeah. However, I think they still need some new addition in the midfield.
The only thing I just want to add very quickly is talk about a potential third midfield signing. Manchester United almost have one. They have a £55 million signing, actually, in Mason Mount, who we've seen play in that position at the end of last season. Michael Carrick has been playing him there again in pre-season. Yes, his injury record has been not great over the last 2 years, but I think that will be another option we see going into the season who could provide some cover in there.
OK, Dan illustrated it very nicely there as to what they still need, Sebastian. So if they're going to spend money on another midfielder and a left-back, who would be your sort of dream options, realistic options for Man United? Who could be that midfielder? Who could be the left back?
I would have gone, as a midfielder, I would have gone for Bruno Guimarães, because he brings that grit, that anger, that aggression, that passion.
They could the move if they've got the money, right?
If they got the money, right? And as a left back, Lewis Hall for me.
But if Lewis Hall is the name that's being bandied around, as United fans, I can imagine that quenching a lot of thirst. I can imagine Newcastle fans watching this going, get his name out your mouth. Like, he's not joining you. He's not leaving us in a summer where they've already seen potentially the exit of Bruno G, Tonali, Anthony Gordon, Eddie Howe. The likelihood of Lewis Hall leaving Newcastle, Dan, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a funny one because we first reported his name in March, and I think a lot of people raised their eyebrows like, oh, Lewis Hall, that's never going to happen. Oh, that's unlikely. And then, look, I think from my perspective, it's shifted a little bit. It's gone from someone on their list to someone they really admire and also actually feels a little bit achievable now this summer in terms of, you look at where Newcastle ended last season, they have no Champions League football to look forward to. You look at the change in manager, the ownership and how they're having to raise funds and players leaving the club. And also, you look at Lewis Hall's kind of role in that, right? I mean, he's not Bruno Guimarães, who looks destined for Arsenal. So actually Lewis Hall, yes, they wouldn't be happy to lose him, but I wouldn't say from a Newcastle perspective he's irreplaceable. He was out of the team a little bit in April anyway, when they ended the season.
He was one of their best players, if not their best player.
No, absolutely. In the Champions League, he was brilliant. Let's not forget. I mean, I think that's where he really, everyone kind of was like, wow, he's really developed in a short space of time here. All I'm saying is, I think from Manchester United's perspective, with all of these factors in, I think they kind of think, actually, he is achievable this summer.
Wow.
If all of the factors go their way. Now, as I mentioned earlier with their recruitment, they want player buy-in, so they're going to have to get that from Lewis Hall.
Do you think they're going to get that from Lewis Hall?
I think they will, because I think what Manchester United have to offer him, and again, people listening to this who maybe aren't Manchester United fans will think, oh, it's Manchester United, they're going on that again. It's not to do with that, it's the footballing reasons. Let's not forget Lewis Hall missed out on the England squad. He didn't go to the World Cup, he has no Champions League football. What Manchester United can offer him is Champions League football and a lot more exposure to the England team. Unfortunately, that's how it works, right? When you play for the so-called bigger clubs, right? And I also think for him, he can be Manchester United's left back for the next 10 years. You get mentored a little bit by Luke Shaw, who was in a similar position when he joined from Southampton as the next biggest thing at left back. I think as a player and on his own footballing journey, there's a lot to be gained just from his perspective. We're not even talking about Manchester United.
Yeah, I think from him as a player, there's kind of not many better left backs around that are kind of available, if that makes sense.
Is Lewis Hall available though? I wouldn't describe Lewis Hall as being available, man.
Listen,
from Newcastle's perspective, he's not, is he?
No, he's not. He's not from Newcastle's. This is what I mean. They're going to need player buy-in to say, not necessarily a Alexander Isak situation, but maybe more Bruno Guimarães situation where, respectfully, I'd like to explore this opportunity. And if there is a fee that you agree that I'm valued at, that Manchester United match, please give me.
What fee would that be?
Look, it's really tough. I think, you consider he's a left back. He's not going to go as, he's English. He's a young player. I think you're probably looking at 50, 60 million pounds. That is an educated guess. Yeah. But
that feels cheap in
the
market to me for Lewis Hall.
Bargain.
Absolutely. But then I have to caveat that with I've also, sources around Manchester United tell me that, I also think it's to caveat them and make sure that they're covered. But I also think it's, do they have the funds to splash out? I think if the possibility is just Lewis Hall, you might not get that midfielder. But as you say, Joe, I think that would quench a lot of thirst because you're getting a star name who could be a left back for the next 10 years. So I think it could be one or the other because
I think the situation reminds me a little bit of sort of Benjamin Sesko last summer, where United seemingly didn't have loads of funds left for business, and then when they knew their absolute priority target wanted to join them, were like, okay, we're going in heavy.
But it was dependent on Rasmus Højlund going though. That was the only caveat with that.
Yeah,
right?
good point.
It was Rasmus Højlund leaving to get one out and one in. That was the only caveat. Whereas Manchester United at the moment think the situation is they're a bit stuck. There are some young players who will likely leave the club on loan or permanent, like Harry Amas, Radek Vitek, Altay Binder. There's some players there that they will get money for, but there's not that one big sale unless something changes with Marcus Rashford. But it doesn't seem to me that I'm hearing there's a big market for Joshua Zirkzee, who the club aren't necessarily shopping. Like that, they're happy for him to stay at the club for sure. If they could upgrade that position, would they? For sure. So it's kind of like neither here or there with Zirkzee. But there isn't that Rasmus Højlund, where they can bank on a conditional obligation where money will definitely come in.
So what about Rashford then? Where are we at on Rashford? Because as things stand today, obviously Barcelona haven't chosen to make that move permanent. He's back at the club. Well, reintegration?
Reintegration, it's weird because it's another one that splits a lot of Manchester United fans. I know that we've spoken in the past a lot about Marcus Rashford and what he's been for Manchester United, etc. But I think one thing we can both kind of agree on is that Manchester United moved on from Marcus Rashford the second he went on his first loan, even Barcelona loan. It was kind of a closing of a Marcus Rashford chapter at Manchester United.
Under a different gaffer, though.
It is under a different gaffer, but I do think he hasn't got a squad number anymore. His number 10 shirt is now being occupied by Matheus Cunha. So it does feel like it looks like a spare. It feels a bit awkward. I don't know if that's the feeling. It feels very awkward to say, listen, in a few days' time, Marcus Rashford's going to turn up at Carrington, turn up into the dressing room, and see someone else sitting where he used to sit. And I just think there's so much at play there, and I'm just curious to see what kind of unfolds.
Is that potentially a positive for United, though? You're getting a player that comes back from a loan that was very successful. You know, he went out there, he won La Liga, scored a bunch of goals in Spain. And yes, it wasn't successful enough to warrant a permanent deal, and they obviously opted for a different style of forward. But I think a hungry Marcus Rashford, who comes back and maybe isn't guaranteed a spot, and he is looking at Matheus Cunha going, he's got my shirt, he's got my spot in the dressing room. I will show United what I can do here. Is that a positive to have a player like that come back when he's played with Carrick before? They know each other extremely well, don't they?
Big point.
Yeah, look, I think one thing you can't deny is Manchester United have another star on their team with Marcus Rashford in the team. You know, regardless of whatever level people think he is at, and that can be something we all discuss in a pub or whatever. But you know, there's no doubt after Bruno Fernandes, you look at proper stars in football. Marcus Rashford is one of those names, right? I think it's very interesting footballing-wise. I think we haven't seen him in a Manchester United shirt, let's not forget, for a year and a half. You know, he's played for 2 clubs since he's last played for Manchester United. And he seemingly, you know, not burned the bridges, but seemed pretty content to move on. Like, he's done podcasts, he's done social media statements where he's not really referenced the club too much. I know he then walked back on that, but even interviews at Barcelona, it didn't seem that he had his heart set on coming back to Manchester United.
He said if he was a magician, he'd stay at Barcelona.
Yeah, you know, there was no, I'm just trying to prove a point in Barcelona, I want to come back to Manchester United. Now look, he might have been sold a dream at Barcelona as well, so you have to empathise for the player. I mean, I spent a few days with Barcelona last week when they played Birmingham, and, you know, look, they were very complimentary about Marcus Rashford, I have to say that, you know, in terms of integrating in Catalonia, in the team. Hansi Flick was a huge fan of him. But then, as you said, Joe, not enough to take up that option, you know, not enough where you sign his England teammate, who, yes, will be younger, on less wages, but, you know, isn't Marcus Rashford. So it does leave Manchester United in a very strange position. They will do their best to reintegrate him as well. I still don't think we can say for certain after deadline day he will be in a Manchester United shirt. I think very likely we could see him potentially play in that first game in Hull. But I also wonder in that week, will we see teams around Europe or in the Premier League, depending on what happens in that first weekend, you know, maybe panic and look to sign a Marcus Rashford? And then does that give Manchester United room to strengthen or reinvest in that final week? I wonder, but at the moment it looks like he's going to be reunited with Michael Carrick. And
I honestly think it's a positive for United to have Rashford in that position. I think United look a little bit light at left wing, and I really prefer Patrick Dorgu playing higher up the pitch, and I think he was excellent there prior to his injury. But having an asset like Marcus Rashford at left wing, who isn't a guaranteed starter, who you know Matheus Cunha is probably ahead of in the first 11, but is hungry enough to come and show an impact, that should be seen as a positive for United, man. On the training ground, I guarantee you, United players are looking at Rashford's return and thinking this could be a good thing.
Yeah, I can see that, because I look at Manchester United's options in attacking areas, and there's not quite anything like Marcus Rashford. He is a little bit unique in that sense, where, you know, he's a physical presence, but also we know what he is on the ball and, you know, going that way. So from that perspective, I understand that, and I understand the appetite to reintegrate Marcus Rashford. It almost feels like Manchester United are going this way. They're going up under Michael Carrick. It feels like at this moment in time they're going one way and they're going in a positive direction. And for all Manchester United have gone through over the last decade, for Marcus Rashford not to kind of be a part of that where Manchester United are improving, it feels very, very strange. But like I say, I do think Manchester United have evolved beyond Marcus Rashford at this moment in time. But listen, Michael Carrick will have the biggest say in that, and if he does end up staying beyond deadline day, I think there will have been conversations between the two of them, and they'll be very much primed and set up to continue a beautiful relationship.
But there's 2 points I would add. First of all, I do agree, Joe. He will be a positive, also for the fan base. I mean, You can imagine that first home game against
Think
Ipswich.
you'd have to win around a bit.
I think yes, but then I would also argue that first home game against Ipswich, he will get an incredible ovation. I mean, I think he'll get, because the fans will back him, the fans will support him, and, if he comes off the bench, he will get a huge ovation. I don't think there's any doubt about that. My footballing kind of brain, though, and kind of not issue, but I guess warning that Marcus Rashford comes with is there have been multiple managers who seemingly kind of wanted to, you talk about Mason Mount, how many managers just love him, absolutely, want him in the team. Marcus Rashford has had a few managers where he's come out the team, especially because of his defensive work. And look, I think Manchester United, we saw Matheus Cunha, great example, when Michael Carrick came in against Arsenal Manchester City. Matheus Cunha was dropped, because he put Patrick Dorgu in, because I don't think he quite trusted Cunha yet at that point to do the work going backwards. I think we saw Cunha's performances after that were brilliant defensively, putting slide tackles in and all of that. With Marcus Rashford, we saw in the World Cup a great example of this. Congo until France, he didn't play because Thomas Tuchel clearly didn't trust his defensive work. He had some great cameos in the group stages, but I also think that's why Hansi Flick has moved on from Marcus Rashford. He's gone for Anthony Gordon. You look at the numbers. I don't need to put out the numbers. The presses, the defensive work going backwards, helping your fullback. Marcus Rashford's going to have to buy into that. And, I hope he does, by the way. But I'm just saying there is a track record. Eric Ten Hag had a similar, I'm not going to say issue, but, contention with Marcus Rashford's play with that aspect as well. So I just think he needs to buy into a Manchester United building, like you said, Will, and we'll see. But he has to do that if he's going to stay and play in these last few years of his contract.
Let's talk a little bit about the expectations for the season, the hopes then, before we wrap this thing up. Where do United finish this season? Where is the goal, do you think, for United to finish this season?
I think off the back of last season, you've got to be looking at the very least another Champions League qualifying campaign.
At the very least.
At the very least.
So what's the other?
At the very least. Listen, I read Lenny Yoro speaking, and he said Manchester United should be, of course, Manchester United should be thinking about winning the league title, and I think that does bode well. It's always nice during pre-season when you do get players coming out and saying, listen, we can win the league. There's clearly a positive energy within the Manchester United squad, and winning the league, as far-fetched as that sounds, you're never too far off, are you? Listen, everyone starts the league with 0 points, including Arsenal. So I say let's see, but I think a Champions League qualifying season should be, at very least, the ambition.
What do you think, Dan? What will United internally be thinking? Because when Carrick came in, I think that noise changed, didn't it? It was sort of, we want to get Champions League football here, and that surprised some people. So are the club thinking behind the scenes now, we want to go to the next level, or is it a consolidation season?
Look, I think that I'm really optimistic in terms of reporting on Manchester United this season, first of all, because I think there's so much to be excited about. There's so many unknowns, right? First of all, the transfer window, but also like Shea Lacey. Can't wait to see him play a bit more.
We haven't
He's going to be a first-team player this season, Brilliant. Like, they need someone on that right-hand side. Very exciting prospect. So there's JJ Gabriel, we will probably see a debut of in some sort of cup competition, and he'll probably travel with the team on Champions League trips because you're allowed to bring such huge squads. So first of all, there's like the academy aspect, which is very exciting going forward. And then the team. And I think in terms of, to answer your question, Joe, internally, look, I don't think Manchester United, last year they weren't being unrealistic when they just wanted to return to European football. And then, as you said, they adjusted that because actually they saw the rest of the league and how the team they thought were maybe underperforming and Champions League football was attainable. I think going into this season, I'm sorry if any Manchester United fans listening, but I think they just need a few Arteta years, in terms of like, you just need a few years. I don't mean just this season, but a few consecutive years of finishing in the Champions League, because I think the perception is teams just go into the Champions League for 1 year, they get an influx of money. It's not quite how it works. They need 3 or 4 years in the Champions League to really build that financial picture, to then bring in all these excellent players, right? So to me, they need back-to-back seasons in the Champions League. I mean, let's not forget this is a team who, finished 15th, 14th a few years ago under Eric Ten Hag, 8th, 7th. They haven't had back-to-back Champions League. See, I don't think the Champions League has been missing Manchester United in that sense. It hasn't been the norm compared to when we were growing up, where they're there every single year. That's what they need to get back to.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in terms of the rest of the traditional sort of big six, in quotation marks, like there's a lot of flux there. There's a lot of change there. Basically, everybody has changed manager. Obviously, Aston Villa have stayed very consistent, though, haven't they? Newcastle have changed manager as well. I think Michael Carrick is maybe the 7th longest serving gaffer in the league at this stage, and he came in, second half of the season. So, in terms of continuity, I think United have every shot of being right up there.
And it also feels like there's not any doubts over any player uncertainty either. Bruno Fernandes's future. I've been told he is absolutely staying this summer. In case anyone still thought there were any chance that he could leave this summer, he's absolutely staying. So in terms of the club, the squad, everything seems to finally kind of just be heading the same direction, where there's no off-field distractions either. And as you mentioned, Joe, so many other teams have either lost hugely significant players. You mentioned Villa. Yes, they have signed a few players, but to lose Morgan Rogers, for example, who played every minute of almost every game, huge. Chelsea, what are they going to do under Xabi Alonso? I really don't know. Arsenal might be without Saliba for a few months. I know they have some great defenders, but for Manchester United, I think they need a strong start to the season. I'm absolutely not disrespecting Ipswich and Hull, but they need 6 points from that. To then start that Champions League campaign in September and October, where if you do drop a few points, it's all right because you have that bit of buffer, and that 3-week break, by the way, in September is going to be a killer. We're going to have to do another one of these, I think, in that 3-week break.
We looked at Mateus Fernandes for Tottenham. Yeah. Again, someone Manchester United really liked, but actually, I would argue, you mentioned they needed bodies in, and for 84, 85 million, the same price, Fernandes went to Tottenham. They got 2 players there. Let's not forget, Tielemans has years of experience in the Premier League.
For me, he's
who's won trophies at both clubs.
He won trophies and he's reliable. You don't really think about, is he going to get it? Is he not going to get it? He's the one going to bring you a little bit more, so because he can see things a little bit quicker. The football IQ of Yuri Tielemans, honestly, is second to none. But actually, Manchester United, they need that. When I say aggression, hear me out. They need legs. They need somebody that's going to be able to allow the other flair player to play their game. You talk about the Mason Mount. He's not a natural grafter. Yeah. So you need somebody that's going to graft naturally, that's going to enable the others to play their game. That's what we call the complementary. I think at the moment, they have the same style of midfielder. Andre Santos, he's left-footed, he's got legs, but he's not that sitting midfield that's going to sweeper to allow the likes of Kobe Mainoo to be a little bit more creative and to do his things. Right now, the likes of Kobe Mainoo, they would have had to do a little bit more, a bit too much, instead of concentrating on their superpower and what they do well.
That's the aspect they're still replacing of Casemiro, essentially, is that those defensive abilities. But look, let's see what happens in the next few weeks.
What about Marcus Rashford? Could Marcus Rashford put on a Man United shirt again and be out there at the start of the season? Could it happen?
It's quite incredible. We've seen him in 2 different shirts since the last time we saw him in a Manchester United shirt, obviously for Aston Villa and now Barcelona. It was very interesting. Look, a lot of last season, I think his future seemed more likely away from Old Trafford going into this season. That has obviously changed. Barcelona didn't take up the option to sign him on a permanent basis. I think there were different reasons for that. I spent a few days with the Barcelona camp when they took on Birmingham over the weekend, but a few days before that. And I asked Hansi Flick himself why they didn't take up the option. And he even admitted he misses Rashford. The team he's sensing is missing Rashford. They all appreciate his free kick against Real Madrid, which all but secured the La Liga title. But essentially, they chose to go for Anthony Gordon instead from Newcastle. Now, Marcus Rashford is a great asset to Manchester United if they can get him back to the level he showed after the Qatar World Cup. We haven't seen that Marcus Rashford in Manchester United shirt for a long time, though. We saw him at the World Cup have glimpses, but I also think we saw aspects of his game that maybe previous managers haven't appreciated. The defensive side of the game, which is maybe why Barcelona didn't end up pursuing him long term. As I understand it, he is more likely to be a Manchester United player after deadline day, and we can expect to see him in a Manchester United shirt very soon. I think him and Kobe Mainoo expected to join the team the next week or two. Should see him in Dublin when they take on Leeds next week. So it'll be very interesting. I also just wonder, just finally, I know I'm going on a little bit, if his future isn't at Old Trafford, I do wonder when the season starts, if there is a big team in the Premier League or Europe, results don't go their way, think he would still provide a solution for a team like that.
What do you think is better for Marcus Rashford himself at this stage of his career? Is it to go back to Man United, or is it to turn over another new leaf and go somewhere else?
I reckon Marcus Rashford is better away from Man United. Not for the simple reason that he's from Man United, and I think unconsciously he kind of not relaxes a lot or too much, but he's too comfortable at Man United. He's from there. He's born there. He grew up there. So every time he went away, he had that impact. Marcus Rashford is a terrific, for me, player. Honestly, he's so talented. He can have impact, but unconsciously and subconsciously, Man United is home. And every time he went away from home, he had that kind of spark. He had that impact straight away. Now, the business of football is a bit difficult. Is he going to be able to get away again? The other team going to be taking a chance on him? I don't know. But at Man United, the only positive side that I see is Michael Carrick. With the way, I don't know, his aura, I think he's the type of manager, the type of man, not only the manager, a man that can really get into Marcus Rashford and have a one-on-one conversation, and more than one-on-one conversation, have a real work throughout the season to on the human side, get the best out of Marcus Rashford, help him transition that part. If he can do that, you'll have a superstar again, rising up back again.